What the hell?
Hello.
That was weird.
Shoes? Yeah. All right. We'll fix that in post. All right. Welcome to Best in Faction.
The next generation.
Okay. Honestly, I forgot my fucking joke because of that.
All right. We're gonna run it back. Run it back. Try
Insert
again.
short joke here.
Lucas, you can do better than that. A podcast where the players are short and the episodes are shorter. There's your joke.
Podcast that's shorter than a 10th edition data sheet.
That's a great idea. All right, here we go. From the top. Welcome to Best in Faction.
The next generation.
A podcast that's shorter than a 10th edition data sheet.
I'm Tyler.
I'm Nick.
And I'm Lucas.
And today, despite technical difficulties, we are going to be breaking down some of the most technologically advanced nonsense in the 41st millennium. We are bringing you the final installment of our TNG faction series covering the Leagues of Votann, as brought to you by Mr. Nicholas Olson Johnson over here, the reigning best in faction Leagues of Votann player in both generalship and hobby. It's going to be great. We're going to learn all about Votann, how to play them, how to play against them, what's going on with them in the meta right now. It's going to be a ball and a biscuit. You're not going to want to miss it. But before we jump into any of that, I got to check in with my boys because I am currently far away in the land of terrible internet. How you doing today, Lucas?
I'm all right. Yeah, just kind of doing some hobby work in a tournament lull between Rosehammer and Tau Tipping. So don't have any tournaments to go to for the next month or so. So trying to get some orcs painted up in the meantime, which has been really fun. So doing a lot of that, doing pretty well. It's starting to become springtime here in Portland, so there's a lot less dark evenings and a lot less rain. It's just kind of nice to go out and explore the city when it's nice and sunny. So yeah, feeling pretty good overall. Some nice hobby progress, some nice improvements to the weather outside have improved my mood significantly. Yeah, it's just been a great little time recently. How have you been, Nick?
I have been doing well. Getting back into the swing of things, practicing. I was able to play 3 practice games this past week, which was sick. Unfortunately, not with Votann, although we did get some practice games in the week before with that. I've been testing out some lists for our teams event coming up in June, which I know you might think is a bit far out, but we don't really have a lot of big tournaments between then and now up here. I know we got Tau Tipping at the end of April, which will be fun. And yeah, I mean, with the announcement of 10th, the excitement for the new edition grows, and looking forward to ending 9th on a high note. And I mean, what's better than going and crushing a team tournament with the boys? So that's kind of where my focus is at right now. But yeah, looking forward to testing some more wacky builds for that and to talk about Votann. How's it going down in California, Tyler?
It is going real well. I just finished up my my finals. I'm in grad school right now, for those of y'all who don't know, and having a little bit of a break. It's very nice. Getting some good games in. Playing around more with these truck-based builds that Lothurus keeps churning out. They're really interesting and a lot of fun. Lucas and I had a good game the other day trying out that into orcs, and it's way better than it is with the bikes. So I'm excited to finally have an army where I might be able to beat Lucas at some point. We'll get there. Yeah, it's good stuff. Very excited about the 10th stuff. Oh my gosh, so many new bug kits. The new termagants are insane. That video is fantastic. So I'm living large right now. Very excited for the things to come and looking forward to what's coming up. Yeah. As a formal plug, by the way, for that tournament, for those of y'all who are in the Northwest or anywhere near the Northwest, frankly, it's worth traveling for. We have the Brood Wars team tournament coming up. It's going to be the first weekend in June. I think it's June 3rd and 4th, but it's that first weekend. It's going to be a 5-man teams event being held up in Olympia, Washington by our boy Chase. If you need more information, you can look it up on BCP and you'll be able to get stuff from there. If you're having trouble, DM one of us and we'll get you hooked up. It's going to be awesome. Team 40K is the best 40K. We're all going to be there with a team. I'm fairly certain that Colin's coming down with a team from up north. It's going to be a really good time. The full shebang, 5-man teams, differential scoring. It's the best way to play Warhammer. And if you've never done it before, get yourself 4 friends and come down and make it happen. Anyway, with that all out of the way, Mr. Olson Johnson, you want to get us right into the main event? Take it away on the Leagues of Votann.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about Leagues of Votann and Arks of Omen. We've been doing that with GSC and Orcs already. So I'm going to kind of do similar structure to what you guys did, kind of like looking at where they were at in Nephilim and then where they're at today in Arks, and then kind of explaining just like, strengths and weaknesses of the army, how to use that to your advantage, and then how as an opponent to use that to your advantage, and then kind of like what they're looking like now going forward. Obviously you guys have played against Votann more than I've played against GSC and frankly new Orcs. So like if you ever want to weigh in or if you got any questions, like feel free to hop on in. Okay. All right. And let's get started. So today, kind of just kicking it off, who are the Leagues of Votann? They are the newest faction in 40K. Basically just redone squats, but they have a very fresh paint job. They're pretty famous for their rules being so good and their models being so cheap in points that they were nerfed before release. Release Votann was an entirely different army than the one that we got, the pre-nerfed one, but entirely necessary because playtesting that pre-nerfed version was ridiculous. Where they've kind of settled is they're a somewhat elite shooting army with some melee support. But I'm fairly confident calling them a shooting army. They're definitely not a mixed arms army. They have like 2 melee units and one is like a melee / shooting unit. And most of their things have guns. So there we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some data here. And I do want to do a little bit of a shout out. I did get this data from over at StatCheck. So if you guys have not checked them out before, they are doing some super great work. Just look up StatCheck. They have this metadata dashboard, which is where the data is from, entirely free online. Pretty much, in my opinion, the best place to be getting your data from in 40K. They have it broken down by sub-faction, broken down by different matchup win rates. And yeah, they even have some of the archives, which is why I was able to go look at this Nephilim data here, which allows us to do super cool things today. So at the end of Nephilim, Votann ended the season with a 54% win rate, which is pretty good. Like that's in the band of like healthy win rate, according to GW. I think it's like what 45 to 60 is like, I think above 60 is like they start thinking it's a little unhealthy. Looking down kind of at like the breakdown, I thought this was pretty interesting. 35% of players have 3 wins and 26% have 4 or more. So it looks like they're a pretty solid like 3-2, 4-2 or higher faction. And something that is interesting is almost entirely made up of one sub-faction. 67% of players were playing Ymir, 22% playing GTL, and then some other name sub-factions, Urani Surtur Regulates and Cronus, show up a little bit, but are barely represented. And then there's like the other name sub-faction that just doesn't show up, and the custom sub-factions are like 0.2% or something. So that's a little bit of an indicator that probably a little bit unhealthy in there, that like one sub-faction dominates over all the others. Looking at their secondaries in Nephilim, they had relatively okay secondaries. They had Ancestors Are Watching. That is the one where every time a unit dies with a judgment token on it, you score 2 points. And if there's You get an additional point for everything with 3 judgment, but then you lose points at the end of the game for everything with a judgment still on it. That one's a pretty strong secondary. It's basically just like play the game, do the thing your army's meant to do, score some points. But your opponent can play around it because they can like do actions and you have to give them tokens, and then they can like hide those units. Especially if your opponent's going second, they can hide these like little action units and they could actually like subtract some points from your score at the end of the game. I think that one's very fun and honestly a pretty balanced secondary, in comparison to some of the other secondaries that are like do the thing your faction does, score 15. Grudge Match. This is a very funny secondary. This was like a kind of pseudo assassinate where you had to nominate your opponent's warlord and then 4 other units. And I think it was their most no, it wasn't their most expensive units, but you got bonus points if it was over like 150 points, and you got bonus points if you killed it in melee. But you also lost points at the end of the game for each thing that you didn't kill. It was a very, very, very niche secondary. You very rarely took it over assassinate, but sometimes you looked at your opponent and they had like 4 expensive bricks that like were kind of come charging at you, and you're like, grudge match, I guess. It can also lose you games, though, as we so famously found out at Atomic City Warzone. So my relationship with grudge match was forever soured after that. Lay Claim. Lay Claim is the very weird secondary where your opponent places 3 objective markers after they know who's going first. They have to be like a certain distance away from the board edge and the DZ and from each other. It is basically another kill secondary in disguise because you get 5 points at the end of the game for each one that you controlled. And, well, yeah, that was kind of sketchy if you went first, so you had to table your opponent real quick. But Votann were pretty decent at that for the right armies. And the last one was Prospects. This one had the ancient action wording that you couldn't start the action if there was an enemy unit on the objective, which I think they've since moved on from like most, where now they say if you control it, you can do it, which has been a fabulous change. Very silly when like a single, grot consolidates and toes onto your objective and you can't, do your 3-point action secondary for 4 turns or something because they keep doing that. But it is scanning no man's land objectives with no enemy units on it. So really only viable on like Data Scry or the Scouring, and only into certain armies. If you're playing against a high pressure army, they're just going to flood the objectives all the time. So these secondaries weren't printed in the Nephilim book. These were printed in the Votann Codex since they came out well after the Nephilim book had come out. So some people were hoping that things might have been, changed up in like a new season, but they could like revisit the secondaries. Because honestly, like Ancestors, pretty good. Grudge Match, fine. Lay Claim and Prospects probably could use some work. They're not the best secondaries. But yeah, heading into what changed in Arks and Omens, we have points and secondary changes. So points-wise, many units went up in points. Votann weren't like crushing, obviously, 54% win rate, but like when half or more of your faction is going positive, I guess they kind of wanted to tweak a few things. They also, we're going to go into their army mechanics in a little bit. They are relatively unfun to play against for certain armies because I feel like Votann is kind of just like there's certain armies they just blow out of the water. And so to address that, GW is trying to hit some of the points to kind of force you to make a few choices, maybe cut a unit or 2 here. So the big change was the troops. The Hearthkin went up a point a model, going from 12 to 13. The Grimnir and Call, that's the wizard and the guy who glares at people, they went up 10 points each. The land forts went up 20 points each, which makes sense because every single list had like 2 of them. Zerkers went up 3 points each, which also made sense because a lot of lists had like 10 to 15. The Thunderkin went down 5, which made sense because no one was playing them. Secondaries weren't changed too much, unfortunately. Grudge Match was just straight up removed from the game. So your very, very niche scenario where you take it is just gone. The other 3 secondaries were unchanged. So I know people were like hoping that Prospects would get the updated action wording. Unfortunately, it did not, which makes it still a very niche secondary. None of the generic secondaries too. So talking about the generic secondary changes, really big ones were Behind. Behind went from 2 points for 1 unit to 3 points for 1 unit. Unfortunately, Behind a little tough for the standard Votann lists. I know there's like some weird stuff with Terminators people are doing, and it's like, that's okay. But it's not like a default secondary, at least with the list that I'm usually playing. Another secondary that Votann would take sometimes was Mental Interrogation with the Grimnir, but unfortunately Mental got destroyed in this update, requiring you to have line of sight to the thing you're interrogating now, and also the Grimnir going up 10 points and just kind of everything else overall getting more expensive. There isn't really as much of a point to bring the Grimnir anymore, because it's pretty sketch to try to do Warp Ritual for 3 turns with 1 Psyker. Especially with relatively few screens. Your opponent might just like get a nice little melee unit in there and punk him like turn 2, and now you've just lost, well, what is it, 9 points? So that's a bummer. So yeah. Heading into the list building changes in Omens, we all know, or we're all very familiar now with the Arks of Omen detachment change. Not requiring you to take troops anymore, just having one big detachment where you can take 6 of any one unit you want, and then like 3 of everything else. You can take a few more characters. You can take 6 troops, but basically now that you're no longer required to take troops, a lot of Votann players have been switching to more bikes. Beforehand, the issue was always trying to take a battalion and having to take 30 Hearthkin, or do you shell out the 2 CP for another patrol? So you only take 20 Hearthkin, but you get to take 9 bikes. And turns out Votann really liked their CP, so you just took the battalion. Thunderkin going down, and the free strat reserves now mean they're a viable unit. If you've been looking at any Votann lists since Arks of Omen came out, there are at least like 1 squad of 3 Thunderkin in like every list. And some lists have 2, some even have 3. Some people are even doing wild stuff where they're like 2 squads of 5, you know, like with beams and stuff. But in my opinion, the like squads of 3 with Grav are kind of where it's at. With the Marines coming back into the meta, the Grav gun is very good. D6 shots at 5.33 into Marines. And coming in from strat reserves means the slow movement of the Thunderkin and also like relatively short range of the Grav. Well, you can kind of just show up from the board edge and cut angles wherever you want. So that unit's pretty good now. However, because of the points increases, you're forced to make some choices. You're kind of like forced to ask yourself, like, okay, if I'm not forced to take the troops, do I shell out points for the troops? Yes or no? We'll kind of go over why you might want some troops and why you might not want some troops as we talk into like strengths and weaknesses of Votann. But the troops give you a good primary game. Without the troops, the only thing that's obstacle in the army is the bikes, and the bikes aren't that tanky. I mean, they're T5, which is cool, but they're 4 armor, and like they can't get cover. So like they can get light cover and get dense cover. But yeah, 10 wounds on a 4 armor, pretty easy to kill. So your opponent can kind of like kill your primary units very quickly, and then the mid to late game starts getting pretty hard without those Hearthkin. But looking at the points changes, they're 130 points for Hearthkin, 135 if you want to bring a med pack, which I think is like the best upgrade for them. That right there is what, 30 points less than 5 Zerkers. It's also 10 points more than 3 bikes. So you're kind of forced into this decision here. Like, is this unit that doesn't do that much damage and is just board control worth buying over a unit that like gives me more damage? And we'll go over that later. Talking about the Grimnir as well. I already kind of talked about this in the last slide, but Grimnir value going way down with mental nerf. In my opinion, you don't really bring the Grimnir in your lists anymore. And the other question that I've seen a lot of people asking is how many Zerkers, if any? If you're playing Ymir, Zerkers are really good because they get that 5-up invul. If you're not playing Ymir, it's a little sketchier. There are 165 points for 5 guys that die like that once they get out. I know some people do like them like a squad or 2 in GTL. I do think you need some sort of melee threat because there are going to be some points in the game where you need to like delete something behind a wall and you don't have an ignore line of sight. You're not going to be fast enough to get behind that wall. You need to send in the Zerkers and they need to clear out that unit behind there. Also, if people decide to try to vibe check you, you need to have some sort of like counter charge. You can't just be relying on like your shots to pick them up. So that's the question though, because Zerkers are a hefty payment nowadays. 165 points for 5. It's a big investment if you want to be bringing like multiple units of them. So yeah. All right. So we're talking about the strengths of Votann now. So kind of talking about how to play them in Arks of Omen. What do we have that like makes the army good? What makes the army tick? So they have very high damage. The judgment token mechanic, the hits auto wounding on 6, 5s, and 4s means everything in the army can punch up. Those Hearthkin I was talking about earlier, when they're shooting things with 2 or 3 judgment tokens on them, suddenly they're doing a lot of damage. They have easy access to chapter master rerolls in multiple phases due to stratagems. So there's the ancestral judgment stratagem you can use whenever you're targeting something with a judgment token on it, and that can be used in the shooter fight phase, and it's not locked to core. So you can have your land fort shoot with chapter master in the shooting phase. You could have your Zerkers punch with chapter master in the fight phase. So that makes your army super efficient, especially when most of those hits are converting to wounds. They also have a lot of high AP. I think everything in the book is at least AP 1. Most things in the book are like AP 2 or better. Everything is like a multi-damage attack. The Votann are really famous. There's a ton of 2 damage in the book. Zerkers even have like their 3 damage hammers. And then you start getting into like the land fort with the 4 damage beamers. You can even get higher AP in Ymir. So every sub-faction interacts with Judgment in a different way. How Ymir interacts with it is if your opponent has a Judgment token on you and you're within half range when you make a shooting attack, you increase the AP of that attack by 1. So all of a sudden, all your AP 1s and like 2s are going to like 2s and 3s. Cronus as well. I did want to call this out. I know they're not like super popular, but with 2 Judgment tokens in melee, it improves your AP in melee by 1. So high AP with AOC going away means you kind of like cut through your opponent's armies. Another thing about Votann is they're very tanky. They still have Armor of Contempt. It's called Void Armor. That reduces all incoming AP by 1. It also has a second rule for some reason, which turns off your opponent's wound rerolls and damage rerolls. So this will kind of catch you off guard. I know like Lightning Claws are a really popular unit now, and are really popular now the Marines are back. Lightning Claws are really good for like low strength, but wound rerolls, you don't get that in the Votann. Also, like if there's, I was talking about the bikes being relatively easy to kill earlier. If you kind of pump just a little bit of shots into them and you come up short by 2 damage, you're like, I'm going to reroll that wound. You can't do that. Even the reroll damage has come up a few times where someone's like, shucks, I rolled a 1 on my Melta that got 3 or 4 up invul, and I'm going to reroll the damage. And I'm like, sorry, I'm taking 1, or I'm taking 3. Yeah. So Votann are deceptively tanky. You have to kind of overcommit to kill them. Another thing about the strengths of Votann, I know a lot of people complain about how slow they are. Yes and no. It is both a strength and a weakness. I call it here slow-ish, but steady. They have slow infantry, but their movement and charges are never affected by like movement reduction. So Tanglefoot Grenade, trying to think of other wacky things, like all of those weird like shelling stratagems that would usually be really good against slow armies just don't affect you. You can also use force to your advantage. I know Lucas has talked about this in the past, where against shooting armies, he just likes to deploy his army in the force, and he's like, I'm fine with the -2 because it gives me a -1 to be hit. Votann don't have to make that choice. You can just like go into force and you're fine, which is super strong. Just being able to effectively, carry around a Custodes banner on the board for free. Very good. The other thing too is the vehicles and the bikes are very fast. So you can use that to your advantage. Like they go 12 inches, the Sagittars and the bikes. The land forts go 10, which is pretty good for something with that much destruction stapled onto it. And if you ever really need something to get somewhere, you can advance it, and all their vehicles auto-advance 6, and you can spend a CP to auto-advance another 6. I know that they don't have assault weapons, but like a lot of Votann is kind of setting up for a next like really explosive turn, and you have the ability to do that with your really like powerful shooting units. They can get to where they need to go, so next turn they're threatening your opponent really hard. So it's kind of like using their weird speed to your advantage. You could definitely turn that into a strength.
I'll also mention one other thing in terms of strengths here that I've noticed is their ability to just ignore defensive mechanics that are in terms of terrain around the board, right? So like this is something we've talked about, thinking about terrain in terms of like if light cover matters, it's basically all the pieces of terrain around the board are just free storm shields waiting for you to take advantage of, right? And if you're in a forest, then that's a free venom thrope aura that you can totally take advantage of whenever it's pertinent. Votann have great ability to just ignore all of those defenses, right? So between their Thunderkin, their Bikers, those guys all ignore dense cover. So if you're in a forest or if you're in an industrial piece of terrain, it doesn't matter. They're just going to shoot you a full ballistic skill. Same thing with the Bikers and the forts. They ignore light cover. So if you're trying to get that +1 to save when you're hanging out in a piece of terrain, they don't care about that either. So I'd say that's another strength of Votann, is just the ability to ignore the defenses that are present on each of the terrain features around the map. Basically, your only defense against Votann is you're either in combat with them, so they have to shoot you. You are behind a piece of terrain, so they can't shoot you, or you're lookout surge, so they can't shoot you. There's very few other defensive mechanics that actually work against them, and I'd say that's one of their big strengths.
Yep.
I would add in as well that Votann have a fundamentally different form of attacking than anything else in the game right now, in the existence of beam weapons, which is just an entire sort of new thing to wrap your head around as a surprise factor in addition to everything else. Until you've played into it a lot of times, especially if you play an army that's especially vulnerable to it, something with a lot of vehicles like Chaos Knights, you are like, it fundamentally changes the way you have to move in a way that not a lot of other mechanics do. It's definitely not something that continues to be incredibly, it'll be like overpowered or anything, especially not at the higher levels, but it's a strength, and it's something that you can't theorize about until you've seen it happen.
Yeah, and it's definitely like it helps you auto-win certain matchups. Like matchups where your opponent's army takes up a lot of the board and they can't really move out of the way of their own units. Well, beams are pretty good into them. So
yeah, the trade-up potential just becomes insane. I know we've got a bit rep going up shortly in which you have a single beam that hits 2 kill rigs, and there was just no way to avoid that. And the dice were a little bit nice to Lucas, but you could have just picked up 2 kill rigs in a single gun.
Kill rigs. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Or we're talking about, I mean, what was it at Rosehammer? Where
the Chaos Knights? Oh my god.
Yeah, Chaos Knight opponent just, was like, I'm aware of beams, but just hadn't really moved against them in a while, or like hadn't really played against much Votann. So he lined up a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, all right, 1 land fort hits 4 Chaos Knights, man. Like, but yeah, once you see it, it's a lot easier to play around. But I mean, on some boards, it's just like you look at where your like army can go, and there's no safe place to go that doesn't make you line up. So it's just like you got to constantly be on your game and constantly be thinking and watching out for that. And if you slip up once, well, the Votann player notices. It's bad news. So yeah. All right. Well, I think we've driven home how Votann are a very strong faction. Hit really hard, kill pretty much everything they can see, take a little bit more than you'd expect to kill. How are they weak then? Why are they not crushing the meta? So Votann's weaknesses, they have a pretty weak primary game. I think, in my opinion, what would be calling an army like a strong primary game is where you're able to sit back and score like 8s relatively safely, and also pressure denying like at least one objective from your opponent each turn. That to me feels like a strong primary game. Votann don't really do that. They don't really pressure to take their opponent's objectives too much. If your opponent like sets up nice walls, or like if they have walls on their objectives and they can like project defense, you're kind of just like trading parity at this point. You're like, I'm going to do my defenses, you're going to do your defenses, we're just going to trade over the middle, because once I kind of get to the middle of the board, everything blows up there, and maybe I eventually kill you and roll into your DZ. But they don't really have like these like fast charging units there to go over and steal your objective. They do have the bikes, but like it's 3 fast obsec units. If you have 4 bodies that are obsec on your objective, they're not stealing it from you, as long as the bikes can't see you. The reason why their primary game is much weaker now in Arks than it was in Nephilim is that the troops are an investment now. You're not forced to take them. They've gone up in points. So it's kind of the trade-off of primary or faster damage, right? The troops aren't that quick. So without the troops, you're very, very low on OBSEC. And I kind of about this here. Bikes can steal objectives, but they aren't cheap, right? They're 125 points. You can only take 3 of them. Like if you could take, if the bikes were troops, all this would be fine. But you can only take 3 units of bikes. And sometimes like looking at like what's another, playing a lot of OBSEC Necrons, right? Like the Tomb Blades. The Tomb Blades are fast bikes. They're like 60 points for 3. those guys, if they see an objective they can just advance over and steal, they're going to do that over like caring about how to do damage. However, since your Votann are like an elite army, you don't want to advance the bikes to flip an objective to give up damage, like unless it's like a game-winning play, you know, because they can't shoot after advancing. They can shoot like their 6 shotgun shots, but like the bike unit puts out like 29 shots. You want those other shots. You need to be doing damage with this army, or else you're just going to lose the race. So, yeah, relatively weak primary game. Other thing about that too is pressure armies into them. Like Votann don't have OBSEC on their back objectives really. They have like 3 bikes, so go throw 5 OBSEC bodies on there. You flip the objective. Also, the bikes have to come out and fight. So as soon as you start killing the bikes and you start pushing into their DZ, well, there's nothing left on those objectives to protect it. Talking about the secondary game, they have a relatively weak secondary game as well. We talked about a lot of these like auto 15s. I don't really think Votann have an auto 15. Ancestors is the closest thing to it, but it really is more like a 12 because of how the judgment subtracts. And that's a good secondary. But Ancestors just go out and kill your opponent. They don't have like these sit behind a wall, score 15 that like Guard and GSC and Orcs and like the World Eaters want to play the game, but like they don't really have these like play the game, score 30, it's kind of things. So usually that power comes from your faction secondaries. We talked about earlier that 2 out of 3 of their faction secondaries are pretty weak, and the third one can be somewhat played around. And also just generic secondaries in general are hard for Votann to score. Like Engage and Behind are pretty hard to score. Trying to think of Banners is fine, but like talking about the primary game, like you're kind of just putting up 2 banners and being like, I get a 10. And on some missions, you're not putting up that second banner turn 1, like any corners missions. You're not getting to the top objective with an infantry unit. It's just mathematically impossible.
Also, heaven forbid a banner ever comes down, because you're not getting that back up for a while.
Yep. And I mean, there's like this thing where you could hit your opponent really hard and you could take over the middle of the board and plant a banner like turn 3. And now you're like, yeah, I'm going to get like a 12 or something. That's good.
Yeah.
That doesn't
I think you have to
happen
take
in
the
a high
stat check
pressure army.
approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to take the stat check approach to banners, which is, I think Ennis calls it New the Last, which is, it's an end game scoring of put a bunch of banners up turn 4.
Yep. That's kind of what you're hoping for. And then, I mean, like, you can't do retrieve battlefield data. That's just trolling. Warpcraft is just out for you, which, again, we talked about why. Warp Ritual with 1 Grimnir, pretty sketch. And then, I mean, it just kind of then looks at the remaining ones, which are kill secondaries. So you're kind of looking at Bring It Down, Assassinate, No Prisoners, Ancestors, that sort of thing. So
what about Engage?
You don't have a lot of options. Engage isn't that great, because Engage is like required to be 6 inches away from quadrants.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough. You're usually operating in 2 quadrants and the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So
actually, that's interesting, Tyler.
Right?
I think you should try that, Nick, because all of your units qualify. And even if it's like a remnant unit that's over in a table quarter, it still gets you points. And that to me is the weakest part of the Votann secondary game and primary game, frankly, is there's no fodder units, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is like super important. So like if you can have a remnant of a super important unit still scoring you points, seems not bad.
Yeah. And also, because a lot of your stuff, range isn't such a super issue, especially for something like the bikes or the land forts, like them being not necessarily in the most centralized position doesn't seem like a game-ending position to end up in. And yeah, like Lucas said, I think everything qualifies because the rider is started with 3+ models, nothing to do with characters. So like even your stupid Iron Forge Tech Marine dude counts, right?
I wouldn't see why not.
Yeah. So yeah, everything except the call.
Double
Yeah,
check
give it a try.
Engage.
Yeah.
I think that the staying 6 away is going to be a lot more annoying than it sounds on paper.
But remember, it's 6 away if it's 3 quadrants. It's 3 away if it's 4. So on your send turn, it's pretty doable.
Get 3 points 1 turn? Okay. I'll try it. It doesn't sound great.
I mean, none of your other options sound great, and this seems like something you could learn to play into. I'm not saying
Well,
this is gonna dominate, but it seems like it might have
yeah.
some potential.
The issue that I'm thinking here is like into armies where you're going towards them, you're already like winning with just the kill secondaries. Into armies where you're getting pressured, you're probably not existing in 3 quadrants at the end of your turn that often. You're kind of just like fighting to survive. I'll give it a shot, but yeah, it sounds a bit sketch. So yeah. But yeah, it's not a bad idea because everything does qualify. So the last, yeah, what is it here? Someone was saying that they think engage is a win more. You may as well just play lay claim and just get like your 15 on the last turn. So I think engage is, you're kind of saying it's more like a game where we're like kind of trading parity and you're kind of just like passively hoping to score 2 a turn. And like maybe once or twice during the turn you score 3. Yeah. I don't know how it would fare into something like orcs, you know, or world eaters. I think that seems a little sketch to take engage against those guys. But it might be good against something like guard.
Yeah, but also pressure armies like that have a propensity to bleed secondaries themselves, you know, into orcs. Assassinate is a 15, no prisoners is like a 12 or a 14. Into world leaders, I guess world leaders don't give up a
issue in
whole
those
World
matchups
leaders
is
give
the
up
third
prisoners, for
secondary.
sure.
Yeah, world leaders give up prisoners, yeah.
Not always. The issue in that matchup is the third secondary because banners is pretty bad into pressure armies, right? So you're saying engage might be better than banners. Worth testing.
Yeah.
So yeah. The other thing about Votann, so a lot of when shooting armies are like hyper dominant is because they also have a ludicrous amount of speed. We're talking about Tau here, who like advanced and shoot 18 inches with no penalty and then like fly back 6 inches. And they're like, cool, you can't hit my unit. It's going to do that again next turn. Quins, when light Quins were dominant, going 22 inches and shooting. Okay. And even guard, you think you're safe from guard, and then they order their tanks to go, 12 plus D6 and count as remaining stationary. They also have a redeploy 3 units, so haha, funny, put 6 tanks in the line if I go first. So Votann don't do that. They don't have advance and shoot. They go 10 inches with the land fort. The land fort is a bit awkward to move around terrain, so obviously you can mitigate that by planning out where you're going to move and that sort of thing. But it's a lot easier to play around something that goes 10 inches and shoots than something that goes anywhere from 12 to 18 and shoots, or 16 to 22 and shoots. I know that Quins don't do that as much, but they even go they still go 16 inches and shoot nowadays, which is pretty good with those little tiny guys. But yeah, they're not a fast shooting army, which means that your plan of tabling your opponent a little difficult to pull off sometimes. And kind of we're talking about it here. So bringing it all together, right? If you have a weak secondary and a weak primary game, what's the plan then? How do you win? So you're not great at sitting back and scoring. Your default play style, in my opinion, is bringing the fight right to your opponent. And since you're not a fast shooting army, it means it's hard to cut angles in a single movement phase. So you have to cross the middle ASAP and dig your opponent out. You're not going to win games by your land forts sitting back in your DZ. Your land forts need to come up to your opponent's doorstep and basically go, next turn, I can move my 10 inches and get those shooting angles I need. And I also have 10 to 15 drugged out idiots inside of them that are going to come run into your building and kill you. That's the default Votann playstyle to me. Obviously, depending on what your opponent is doing, it'll change. So you need to figure out your opponent's plan, right? Can your opponent score passively, or do they also have to come fight you? Another thing too is how hard can they pressure your primary? If your opponent's not going to pressure your primary and also has to come to you, you don't have to hit the gas as much. You can maybe set up a more defensive perimeter with your land forts and be I'm fine just trading in the middle. And here's these crazy forts sitting right here just outside of the middle. If your opponent can score passively really well though, and also has fast obstacle units that are going to come flip your primary at some point, go right towards them. Be I need to go flip your primary. I'm going to stop your passive scoring. That's what you got to do in order to beat them. obviously, like this changes too against like pressure armies. You can't just drive up to the middle and slam down 2 land forts if they're going to countercharge them and kill both land forts. You have to be a little bit careful with how you do it. Like in the World Eaters, they're fully capable of killing both land forts if they get to charge their entire army at them. So you have to think about like, all right, I am going to sacrifice units to like screen, but also put up pressure. It's kind of like you don't want to drip feed units in these matchups. It's like when you commit, you're committing your army. You could like maybe hold like a squad of bikes in the back, and obviously you got your Thunderkin in reserves, or like if you're playing the Terminators, yeah, the Terminators can teleport, so like they can like hang in the back and come in and counterpunch. But yeah, you don't just want to like feed your opponent units for free. You do need to protect your heavy damage dealers, while also being able to put up the threat of those heavy damage dealers hitting them next turn. A last thing, in my opinion, is just really paying attention to the terrain. Obviously, Votann change a lot in their effectiveness depending on the terrain format you're playing. And we can kind of like talk about that too. I think that'd be an interesting discussion together. But questions that I always look at when I look at the board, or we usually play player place up here, kind of thinking about like how I'm setting up the board, or like if my opponent gets defender, how they're setting up the board first. How open is the middle of the board, right? Are you able to just like shoot cross court like through the middle, or is there like a big wall blocking your shots? Like, do you have to move your land forts at awkward angles? Do you have to split them up? Can you keep them together? And a lot of things too that I'm thinking about is, where am I going to put my shooting units this turn, so next turn they're like projecting the most damage to my opponent. If you don't have great shots with your fort, just like try to project threat with it. And the last but not least is, yeah, kind of how close can you get to your opponents to pressure them without just losing the game? Because if the answer is you can get as close as possible, jam right towards them. But, you know, like I said, if they can countercharge and effectively clear your army, you need to be a little bit more careful about like threat ranges, and also like where you're screening with your bikes, or maybe like other trash units if you have them. Not calling bikes a trash unit, but I'd rather have a countercharge kill 6 bikes than kill 2 land forts.
Yeah, the land fort is tanky, but you definitely got to know the units that can kill it, because there are certain types of units that can just one-shot a land fort if you're not careful.
Yeah. And I think this changes a lot on different like terrain formats. Like Votann on player place, it is heavily dependent, I know, like on the attacker defender roll off, right? Depending on matchup. Usually if you win defender, there's very few armies in the game that can outshoot you, so you're totally fine making the middle open. And if your opponent wins defender, they're usually afraid of your shooting, so they're going to make the middle like closed off. This, you know, happens in like those 5 objective missions. It's a little bit different on something like Tide of Conviction or Recover the Relics or Data Scry Salvage. Those games can get very interesting. But yeah, that one's a lot of just like paying attention. You want to create like nice big wide lanes for your land forts to move through and also shoot through. You also just probably want to set up like defensive areas for you to just passively score 8 every turn. You really don't want your opponent shooting you off of your objectives, because you're not really committing many units to your backfield. And then other terrain formats like what UKTC. We haven't ever played on UKTC, but UKTC has like the fixed terrain format, which I know is like pretty famous for. There's like some weird shooting angles, but there's also these like kind of wide open areas across the board in certain places. I know Votann are pretty strong there. There was someone, I think who played against Gaylord. It might be this guy in the comments here. There's someone in the comments was saying that speed was how they were playing at Southampton, GT, with 18 bikes and 15 of the Terminators, which made them a fast shooting army. To cover the weaknesses that we have mentioned. So I know 18 bikes is pretty hard to hide on most of our terrain over here, which is why I haven't really tried it. But I know I'm not super familiar with how easy it is to hide on UKTC. I know they have that giant building usually where you can hide quite a few things in there, and maybe you can hide 18 bikes in there. There might also be some other areas to go to. I remember Gaylord talking about how he put like a scout sentinel in a ruin to block the only safe place that 6 bikes could pregame move into. So there might be some places that they can like safely move into.
There's also,
I
think, no, sorry, I interrupted you. Go.
Yeah, what do you say?
I was going to say, on the topic of terrain formats and being super impactful on Votann's game, I think UKTC terrain is one of the formats where, they are probably more powerful. I think the ability to shoot onto, I don't know, I've never played on UKTC. I've only seen games played on it, and I'm aware of the format and kind of where things are. But it seems like there's a lot more cases on that fixed terrain setup where there are objectives that are just straight up out in the open. And that seems ideal for Votann because the ability to just blast you off an objective is totally within it's absolutely within their means. And so going from your elite shooting army being completely hidden to I move out, project a bunch of threat, and clear you off the objectives, that seems very strong. Whereas on player replaced or GW or something like that, you might move up and then get 0 shots at all and then get completely countercharged. So it really just depends what terrain format you're playing on.
Yeah. If I was able to keep my opponent to a 4 every turn because I got to shoot them off the objective every turn, then no wonder I'm not playing Zerkers, right? That's pretty good. I know another thing, WTC, it's very dependent on the terrain. Obviously, WTC is a teams format, so you have light to medium to heavy boards. And something that I've been seeing a lot of people playing at teams events or hearing about is kind of playing Votann as a defender, where you get to pick your own board. And since you're first or second defender, if you're first defender, you pick the lightest board there. If you're second defender, you might not get as light of a board, but you can still kind of get a good pick of which board you want. And people are skewing a lot into triple land forts because since you get to pick boards with less terrain or more favorable shooting angles, you just go all in on shooting and blow your opponent out of the water. So the terrain that you have available to you will definitely influence your list decisions and also influence how you're going to be playing the game. So yeah, that's why personally, we like the Zerkers a lot because we need to go knock people out of buildings and other people might not. I know, UKTC, someone here in the comments saying that triple land fort really popular in UKTC. I think for similar reasons why it's popular in WTC. Here we do have someone answering from earlier. So I guess why they were hiding their 6 spikes is possibly by strat reserving them. It doesn't seem like the worst idea in the world. 6 spikes coming in from the side of the board. That's 50 shots or something. That's pretty good. So if you look at the board and see you can only hide 6 or 12, just strat reserve the other squad. Makes a lot of sense. You don't need to alpha them with 18 bikes if you go first. Hitting people with 12 bikes is probably good enough into some armies.
Yeah, and they've got solid range, so they're not necessarily in deep trouble if they get screened back a little bit. If they're coming in pretty far back, they're probably not getting shot at. I wonder, Nick, in player-placed formats, let's say we're playing, Death and Zeal, your actual favorite mission.
Sure.
If you get Defender, do you talk about trying to make the middle open? Is it not more advantageous to make your opponent's midfield open?
You talking about their home field objective?
Their midfield. You can't access their home field objective.
Or sorry, the one on the far corner or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably not the worst thing in the world to do that. I know it's you can't do that on missions like Teardown.
Yeah, right? It's strictly for Death and Zeal and for conversion. Or for Prowess in theory.
It's dependent on what they're playing. What really is tough is if they're playing a melee pressure army and they get to slam down a nice fat L in the middle and then basically put their entire army in there and then threaten charges on my home. That seems sketchy. I'd rather do the opposite to them where I get to take over the middle and start threatening charges into their midfield and their home objective. So that's usually why I'm doing that. But yeah, if they're a more passive, if they're a more passive army that doesn't project melee threat sitting in the middle, definitely, taking their midfield objective would be smarter.
I think it really depends on the matchup. I mean, we've obviously everything depends on the matchup, but we've equated world leaders and orcs a lot throughout this podcast as a problem for Votann, and I think where you put your first pursuit terrain into world leaders is wildly different from orcs. I think against eaters, you definitely make the middle as open as possible. Whereas orcs, if you go first, I think there is a lot of validity to making their good bits objective really sketch if possible. Because having a safe good bits objective to get tied and good bits is not great for Votann. So if you can just slam a force on that objective, that's extra sauce.
Yeah. Orcs are
You
also
talked
going
about
to
how,
have a
like,
much harder
difficult it
time
is.
hiding to screen into the middle like that, right? You're not hiding kill rigs behind an L on the center of the table,
No.
Yeah.
whereas you're very easily hiding 12 8-bound and 6 exalted or something.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess you talk about how hard it is to stop good bits. Do you think that like that would even stop it though, or?
I mean, if you can just shoot onto that objective for free every turn, I think it. I mean, even if it doesn't
Yeah.
stop it, it definitely bleeds me units much more than making the middle open does.
Yeah, especially
And I
because
guess
he
it's
can't
like-
get it with Grotz turn 1 anyway. So if he's
Yeah.
putting something other core out there, you have a full turn to shoot at it. And there's a forest there now because you put a forest there. So they got to be a little bit careful. It seems very sketch as an orc player.
Yeah, it's kind of just comes down to you have to like take over the game so you can take over the middle, so you can just good bits the middle. But you can't do that early because then your Grots are move blocking all your units that want to go charge.
Yeah, I'll probably still be able to do it, but it makes it a lot more awkward.
Yeah, it's a possible win condition rather than just giving you 15 for free. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and
Ways to
like
make
we
that match
said,
easier.
having the center L for Lucas doesn't actually radically change the game in any way at all.
Yeah, in fact, I want to stay away from you for as long as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Lucas might honestly be tempted to put a forest in the center himself, or probably a crate more likely, but I don't think he wants anything up there to hide
crates
behind.
are really good into the land forts. If you can, like those, because they want those straight moving lanes. If you can just put crates there, then it's like they have to go up, turn, and it gets really awkward. You can subtract, like you can make them make a whole other turn to get to you by just putting a crate in the middle of where they want to move.
Yep.
So. Land forts definitely fit that category of vehicles that are too big to turn when it comes to getting around on little stuff like that.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I'm sure we'll talk about that more. So I do want to talk about the secondaries that Votann have. And we talked about that a bit here. So like we can kind of go through this quick too. In my opinion, your two default secondaries, obviously we talked about matchup really influencing like what you have. You don't really go, I don't care what I'm playing. I'm taking these 3 secondaries. You don't do that. But your two defaults into most armies are Ancestors Are Watching, to kill things with judgment, and Banners, because Banners is relatively a safe 10. Your other options, however, since you, as we've kind of pointed out, are a table first, ask questions later army, you are going to probably take no prisoners, or you have access to no prisoners. You have access to bring it down. Assassinate, depending on what your opponent's going to do, into something like Orcs, where they're going to be flinging all their characters at you. Assassinate's like pretty good. Into something like Eldar, where they're like 17 wizards are going to be hiding behind a wall. Assassinate's a little bit sketchier. You're kind of, or into GSC, you're basically saying, I am going to table the rest of your army and then come dig your characters out before the game is over. So a little bit sketchier on something like a teams format, where your opponent can just run their characters away. But in a singles format, where your opponent maybe is forced to bring their characters out to play in order to win the game, Assassinate's a lot better. Lay Claim is another option. It's another kill secondary in disguise. You take it, you're basically projecting to your opponent, I'm tabling you in 4 turns. If you can table your opponent's army in 4 turns, Lay Claim's great. Abhor is another option. Without the Grimnir, you have access to Abhor. Obviously, it's great into Grey Knights. If you see T-Suns out there still, it's good into T-Suns. Into something like Orcs, where they're bringing triple kill rig, it's actually better than Banners, in my opinion, because it's a guaranteed 9 as opposed to a sketchy like 10.
Yeah, especially if they've also got the Weird Boy, which you still see from time to time. In those
Yeah,
lists.
if they're bringing the Weird Boy and the 3 rigs, Abhor is great. So yeah. And then honorable mentions, Prospects. Prospects isn't a terrible secondary. I pretty much only take it on Data Scry into armies that aren't running right at me. Or the Scouring, I guess. But that's the weird midfield scanning one where you can't do it if there's opponents on it. Generally really hard. So yeah. Maybe recover the relics, it's fine. Like go first, fly over, do it on their side, do it on your side, get 9. Banners is better on that mission though. So yeah. It's basically where missions where Banners is bad. Take Prospects. So like 2. All right. Do you guys have anything to add about the secondaries here? Do you think there's anything else that I should mention? We obviously talked about maybe engage into some matchups. Might be better than, I think you're saying, Banners. Or like if they don't give up a kill secondary, taking like Ancestors, Banners, engage maybe.
I'm surprised you haven't mentioned grind. That feels like something that an elite shooting army might be really interested in into a lot of matchups.
Yeah, thing is, so grind is in the same category as ancestors. And usually if you can take grind, ancestors is just better.
Yes, but especially if you're not taking any troops, there's no real advantage to having grind there.
Yeah,
I see it.
Giving you the CP for troops. The issue with grind too is like if you go first and your opponent's completely hidden, you're automatically getting a 12 now. And if you go first, your opponent gets to do the thing with grind where they see how much you killed and then try to tie or beat that, which isn't really possible all the time. But like if they pull that off once, all of a sudden your secondary has gone from a 12 to a 9. Whereas ancestors into most armies feels like a safe 12. So that's why I just prefer ancestors over grind. Yeah. Also, I feel like a lot of people know how to play against grind, but not a lot of people know how to play against ancestors yet. So, yeah. But yeah. So we're going to talk about some sample lists here, just kind of give you some ideas of like, all right, where am I coming from here with Votann? So this first list here is the list that I brought to Rosehammer. You can obviously like change up a few points here and there. This is like the famous Beam Death list. This is a variation. This is like the Arks of Omen version of the Nephilim list that I played at Slaanesh and was very popular in Nephilim. We're playing Ymir Conglomerate. It's got a call, the sniper call with Grudge's End along lists. It's got his Forge Master with his Forge Master Warlord trait. We got 3x3 bikes with Scanner, Searchlight, High-Las, 3x5 Zerkers with the Concussion Mauls, 2 squads of 4 Thunderkin with Grav, a land fort with little beams and a big beam, and another land fort with bolts and a big beam. Obviously, you can change some stuff around here. Like you could have 2x3 Thunderkin. You could have beams on both the forts. You could have bolts on both the forts. It's kind of like take your pick, but this is like the general shell of the list right here. And yeah, so this list is like very strong. It's kind of like, this is the one I have the most experience with. It uses like all of those things I was talking about earlier with like kind of like projecting threat like a turn earlier. And just having a lot of your kill power tied to these land forts and these Zerkers, and relatively light on the ground, as you can see. There's what, 1, 2, 5. Yeah, there's not there's not that many units. I think your drops are, you have 7 drops because the Zerkers are in the forts and the Thunderkin are off the board. So yeah, it looks pretty small on the ground, but definitely still hits like a truck. This is another list I haven't had the opportunity to test yet, but this is another concept that has gained some popularity. I haven't really seen it take off in the tournament scene yet, though, but I'm anxious to test it out. It is the Sagittar Spamless. That's people I'm talking about. It is also Ymir. We still have the Sniper Call with Grudges and a long list. We still have the 3x3 bikes with the Scanner, Searchlight, High-Las. What is a little bit different, we have 2 squads of 10 Zerks with Concussion Mauls. But don't worry, because that's very quickly about to become 4 squads of 5, because there are 2 squads of 2 Sagittars with the autocannons, and then there's 3 squads of 3 Thunderkin with Grav. So this list is very different of what it wants to do. It doesn't just like point a land fort at you and say delete. It has a lot more like small moving parts. It has these Sagittars that are faster than the forts. They go 12 inches. They're a lot easier to hide. Like, you know, they're smaller than a rhino, honestly. They're a bit similar size, but kind of wacky. As long as you can hide the antenna, you're good. So yeah. You also project a lot more melee threat. Like I recently tried a list with 2 squads of Zerkers instead of 3, and it was wild to me like how much less pressure I had there. Just like adding, like removing 1 squad of Zerkers made me like feel like, oh wow, this is a lot harder at things hiding behind walls. So I assume that adding in a 4th squad of Zerkers will feel the exact opposite, where it feels a lot nicer to have that. Because in Ymir, these guys are a pain in the ass to bring down. 5-up Invuln and the 5-up Film of Pain. Sometimes you just spike both, and then your opponent's looking there at 3 Zerkers they have to charge. Pretty good. And then it's got 3 squads of, the 3 squads of 3 Thunderkin that gives you 3 different things that can come in from the sides. So the list is trying to, you could probably ball up, you could probably split up. It seems interesting. Obviously, you're giving up your strength into certain armies like Knights. Like I feel like this army just gets ran over by Imperial Knights because it's a bunch of like it's a bunch of below strength 8 damage too, which means that if you can't rack up judgment on those Knights, you're going to just be like wounding on 4s and they have -1 damage everywhere. And that seems a bit tough. So yeah, and Chaos Knights, you probably still have a pretty good game into Chaos Knights, but it's definitely a lot harder than the Forts. The Forts just kind of solve that matchup for you instantly. I do think this might give you some more play though into pressure armies, and we'll talk about like, some of the things that they like to do to play against land forts is tagging them with trash units, and you can't really do that as much in this army because a lot of the power is in melee and a lot of the power is in like units coming in from the side of the board, that sort of thing. So yeah, it would be interesting to test and see.
I gotta say,
I don't.
14 of the 15 units in this list qualify for engage on all fronts.
That is true.
And those Sagittars are real zippy.
Yup.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, might be seeing more of them. Last list, I know we talked about at the beginning that Great Arthurian League GTL is the second most popular Votann subfaction. I was writing a sample GTL list, and I was trying to look through like recent tournaments, and there weren't really that many that did super well at recent tournaments, except one yesterday at Adepticon. I think he made it to the finals. Mr. Arne Zernt brought this GTL list to Adepticon, which I'm going to read right now. So we got Uthar the Destined with his Warlord trait. We got a Forge Master with his Warlord trait. We have that you're seeing a pattern here, 3x3 bikes with Scanner, Searchlight, High-Las. There's a squad of 5 Zerkers with the Mauls and a Mole launcher. There are 2 squads of 5 Hearthguard, so the Terminators with Volkite, Plasma Blade. One of the squads has Warp Strike. A single squad of 3 Thunderkin with Grav, and then 2 Land Forts with Magna Rails and Bolts. So Great Arthurian's difference with Ymir, it gives up the army-wide invuln, which means your land forts are now just 2 up AOC, which is still pretty good. Just a little sketchy into like the AP4, AP5 anti-tank meta we find ourselves in. But what GTL gains in exchange is a lot more damage. GTL's whole thing with judgment tokens is each judgment token counts as 1 higher. So you put 1 judgment token on someone, all of a sudden 5's the hit auto wound. That's very strong. 2 judgment tokens, 4's the hit auto wound. Playing Ymir, you're often shooting. It's really easy to get 1 judgment token on things. Relatively easy to get 2. Usually things are dead before you get 3 on them, unless they're like really big, like a Greater Demon or like a Knight or something like that. But GTL just being able to put the 2 tokens on something really quickly and then being like, you're dead. Very good. So I won't knock that. They also have like a hit and a wound reroll every time they shoot or fight, which is pretty good. A little more efficiency, and all of their models count as 1 more for holding objectives. Land forts count as 5, so a little better primary control than Ymir. The downside is obviously getting killed a lot faster, but the combo is usually Uthar the Destined is pretty cool. He has a ability to if any GTL unit like needs to, I think he can turn a hit, wound, damage, or saving throw to a 6, which is super cool because effectively, if you are able to have a 6-up save against something, it's effectively another 0 out of damage. So your land forts are really tanky. But also on the flip side, you can use it offensively. If there is something you really need to get that Magna Rail hit auto wound through, you can just go 6. But it's after you've rolled. It's like a change it to a 6, so it's even better. It's like the whole knight thing. The other combo that people do is the Magna Rails have this rule that if they roll a 6 to wound, then the damage will spill. So all of a sudden it goes from a tank killing weapon to a infantry killing weapon. So the combo there is you get a judgment on something, you spend a CP to auto hit them. There's a judgment strat for that. And then you roll the wound. If you don't roll a 6, Uthar slaps the tank and you blow up a squad of, Sanguinary Guard or something. So, yeah.
It seems like the range is also potentially very sketchy for GTL because Votann like operating in that like 24 to 18 inch range bracket with all the little beams, all the autocannons, that kind of stuff. The minigun as well, I think, is 24 inch range, or is it 30?
Yep, it's 24.
Seems like the +4 from Ymir really lets you play more cautiously if you want to, whereas GTL, you got to kind of get closer to the opponent and then take more damage as well because you don't have the invuln. That seems like a sketchy proposition. Do you think that's a real thing, or am I over-exaggerating the things there?
Yeah. I mean, I think why you don't see the little beams in GTL is the little beams are only 18-inch range. Like, you have to get dangerously close to shoot them. Also, really hard.
Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't
they're all
notice he has
bolts.
all Magna Rail bolt forts.
Yeah,
Mhm.
the big beam you could run. I honestly, if I ran GTL, I'd probably do like Magna Rail big beam. But the big beam's less effective because the reason why Ymir big beam is so good is because you can for
Strat.
1 CP reduce it to 0, hits do 4 mortals to something. And you don't get that in GTL. So it's like, why not run the Magna Rail when you have Utharth that can turn it into an infantry killing weapon? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like especially if you want to run that split and you're not running Ymir, suddenly, oh, I have to only kill one of these land forts and then the other one doesn't have a rail at all anymore. That seems like a sketchy proposition when that's both easier to do and more impactful to take out one land fort in particular. I like the double rails.
So I think like what you're saying, yes, GTL has to operate at a more like danger close range than Ymir, and I think that you kind of are going for like just a knockout punch. You're getting judgment on things, and you're just going like mass 5s to hit auto wound, like boom. And I think that's why he's got the Hearthguard. Like the Hearthguard can like screen a lot more. They are only 2 up. They don't have a 4 up invuln, but they are still relatively tanky. 2 up AOC, -1 damage. They count as 2 bodies on objectives, which is pretty good. They also have the teleport crests, so they can fly wherever they want, which is super nice. Gives Votann that mobility access. So,
Do Hearthguard have either a
Yeah.
scanner or a way to ignore dents?
no,
They have neither.
They don't.
That's a bummer.
but Uthar is a chapter master, and that's one of his warlord traits there. So you could slap them with chapter master, and they go flying across the board.
Nice.
So, yeah, Uthar's got 2 warlord traits when you buy him 1. He's also, I think he's just a high call innately. So yeah. Actually, I think the chapter master's on his data sheet. Sorry, his warlord traits like +3 inch range to auras, and I think he's allowed to hand out 2 judgment tokens, but to separate units. So yeah. Someone here is asking me, do I like 1 Magna Rail in Ymir? I've seen some people do it. There is one guy, I think, James, I'm trying to remember his last name, over in the UK, who has been running Ymir with 1 beam, 1 Magna Rail. It's obviously good. The Magna Rail's really good into tanks. I don't think you need it to shore up the Knights matchup because you already like win it so hard. There's some where it's like, oh no, if I like get paired into Knights on UKTC Defender where they get to pick the board, I can't shoot them as easily. Like the Magna Rail is like very long range, and like if you can get a shot and 1-shot a Knight, very good. But yeah, it's kind of like what Tyler was saying there. Is like if you're playing against Ymir and you see 1 beam, 1 rail, now you are like, I need to kill the beam fort, and then all they have left is the rail fort, and they're not shooting me with like 10 mortals a turn with the beam fort. So I think that you can do that. I think you just need to be a little more experienced with like how to like protecting your forts and like kind of thinking about like where your forts are. Like something like I recently did was like switching from the James Shapiro. There we go. That's his name. Was switching from the little beams to the bolts on one of the forts. And I just like feel comfortable doing that just because I'm like more, experienced with like where I'm going to be putting the forts and like where the one with the less range that can do the mortals needs to be though. Because you don't want to end up in a position where you're like, oh, I need the beam fort over there, but the rail fort's over there, and like the beam fort's over here. So definitely possible though. And obviously James has been doing like a really good job with it. So I think it's definitely worth testing out.
Yeah, it's an especially dangerous proposition as Votann because, like you said, you don't have a redeploy and you only have like 6 drops.
Mm-hmm.
So if your opponent has any amount of trash units, they're full counter deploying, and the forts are not fast if they're shooting.
Yeah. I do want to answer this question from earlier, talking about things that are strong into Votann. Nick was asking how we handle phase cast stuff as Votann, mainly thinking of the Thirster. So the Thirster is actually the easiest one. So phase cast up is difficult because, as you can see, my army only operates in the. You're kind of going back to this. Only operates on the shooting and the fight phase. I don't have any psychic. I don't have any charge mortals. I don't have any movement mortals or anything like that. I could hope and pray for an explosion on my land fort, but that seems dumb. So yeah, I'm basically shooting, waiting, shooting, punching, and that's how I'm dealing with wound cap stuff. The Thirster is not too bad though, because he's not lookout servable, so I can just, and he's also not obscurable. So if he's starting on the board, if he's not starting on the board, which he probably shouldn't, he comes down. If he comes down within 12 of the land fort or the bikes, I could Auspex scan him. I probably wouldn't with the bikes, but I definitely would with the land fort to try to wound cap him. Also overwatching, just trying to scrape wounds off of him, very good. And then you can kind of feed him a trash unit for a turn, and then you can like shoot him to death the next turn. It's a bit sketchy, but he's the easiest one to handle. Catan are a little weird because they heal every turn, but I found with them you can like shoot, run one with the Zerkers. Now the Catan are forced to fall back and not cast Catan powers, or stay in combat, kill the Zerkers, get wound capped, right? So they've already taken 6. They're down to 3, back to 4, take 3 more down to 1. You shoot them next turn. So Catan aren't too terrible. What's a nightmare is Abaddon. Abaddon destroys Votann. You can't shoot him. I mean, I guess you could put a judgment token on him and the funny call could shoot at him and like hope and pray that you get like wound cap through. But you have to get all the wounds. Abaddon has to fail 3 of them, and then you wound cap him. A little sketchy. A little more doable now that AOC's gone, actually. You're making him take 4 ups instead of 3 ups. So definitely, like, if you're an Abaddon player, don't just let the sniper call shoot you. But I don't know. Abaddon is fine. Yeah, I usually find Abaddon like is hanging out in their DZ and then is like in my lines. And I'm like, oh my God. I know they can't do that as much now because they don't have Abaddon in the Black Legion detachment. So like they can't turn him into Red Corsairs. There may be some dumb ways around that though. But yeah, the usual of Abaddon's in their Arks of Omen's attachment, he's not advancing and charging. So there's at least that now. But
I mean, Nick, there are the Giga Chads out there, like Jason Ryder, who are playing Mono Black Legion.
I mean, honestly, Mono Black Legion is probably the best way to play CSM right now. So, yeah. Nick was asking if Phoenix Lords are a problem. Yeah, honestly, I haven't played against a Phoenix Lord in like 6 months. Yeah, I kind of forgot they were wound capped. Baharoth's just a problem because he's an annoying little asshole who just like teleports everywhere. You're not hitting him. You're only
missed out on
engaging
that
him.
legend at Rosehammer, dude.
Yeah, the guy with Janezar, Baharoth, and Karandras. Is that what it was?
Yeah, that was epic, man. Such a good list.
I mean, that seems pretty easy. They're kind of annoying. I haven't like I don't know who like do people play anything besides Baharoth? Like I haven't seen any of their Phoenix Lords. I mean, obviously besides the legend, but
Jane,
like
Shuckman plays Jane with the Avatar. I don't know if he's doing that right now, but he has in the past. It's a nice little 1-2 combo.
Yeah, that seems annoying. It's not something that I'm like really prepared for. You're probably hoping to get a token on them, snipe them with the call, and then blast them into hell with Zerkers. At least Janezar and like Karandras come to you, so you can kind of just like deal with them. But yeah, Baharoth is just annoying.
But also, like, I don't think that Votann are in a place right now where they can tech for something like Eldar. Like that's not. We're trying to deal with the big dogs right now. If we had room to also deal with some of the medium dogs, that would be real nice. But I don't think that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, here we have someone else who's played against them recently, a fellow Votann player who's played against Baharoth and Janezar to GT. They're okay. Mostly you can ignore Baharoth because his profiles are not great into Votann and their defenses aren't great. So you can just kind of shoot and charge them. Yeah, that's kind of how I agree. They're not as scary as Abaddon, okay? They're not deleting a unit every turn they're in my line. So I'm a little bit more fine with them like charging and punching some things for a turn.
The big concern with them is the op stack, not the damage, for sure.
Definitely, and that's annoying. So if I play against a guy who's running Janezar and Karandras, I'm gonna be like, "Hello, sir. That's a bummer." Yeah. If you want to counter, Votann wound caps are really good into them. They're okay. Let's talk about ways that you can get around wound caps. There's 2 ways. There's a warlord trait. I mean, okay, I guess there's 3 ways. The simplest way is bringing a wizard, right? Bringing the Grimnir. The Grimnir can smite. There's also a targeted smite, which is not bad. It's just Gaze of Hate, 3 dice on a 4-up. If they have a judgment token, it's 3 dice on a 3-up. Do Immortal. I used to run the Grimnir with the stick, which gave him an extra spell. So he got the targeted smite. My old list was pretty good at dealing with Abaddon, actually. I mean, saying pretty good as in hoping and praying they don't corn deny your spells, but, pretty good. The The other warlord traits, there's a warlord trait and there's a weapon. The warlord trait is accessible to all subfactions. It's called Warrior Lord, I think, or Warrior Born. It gives you full wound rerolls in melee and ignore wound cap, feel no pain, damage reduction. Pretty good. I know for like a little bit before the sniper call got super popular, there was a wound cap call who like a delete wound cap call with Warrior Lord and Flare, which is like the Teeth of Terra power axe, basically. It's like a 7 attack axe. So you'd run the call into something and you just go like slam mode, you know, something dumb. Something you can also do that's cool is you can personal grudge a character. So I think it's once per game you can have one of your Votann characters point at one of their characters and they count as having 3 judgment tokens for the rest of the game for that character. So you're like guy that ignores wound caps.
Are you sure that's not a crusade rule?
Nah, dude, it's a very weird stratagem. So your guy could.
When
go
does
run
that
up and
happen?
I think it's in the command phase. If one
And
of
it
you guys
requires
want to
line of sight?
Nah, dude. You know what? I'm looking this stuff up right now. We're doing it live.
That's excellent.
All right. Let me go find personal grudge. Use this stratagem in your command phase. Select one Votann character unit from your army and one enemy unit that is on the battlefield. Till the end of the battle, each time a model in that character unit makes an attack against the selected enemy, the enemy unit is considered to have 3 judgment tokens for the purposes of determining what bonuses apply to the attacking model's attack. You can only use the stratagem once. So your call could point at Abaddon and be like, duel me in the middle of the board, sir. And you will. Which is pretty funny.
I mean, that's not a bad way to get the sniper call to pop off.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that. The other thing too, though, that other people are pointing out here is you can combo Exactor with the Warrior Lord. So Exactor is a very funny hammer that you can put on the Einhir champion. The Einhir champion is the very expensive melee beat stick Votann character. Looks badass. I've wanted to play him, but he keeps going up like 20 points every points update for some reason. He has 4 attacks. Yikes. But Exactor is really cool because it is a hammer. So he's hitting on 3s. Obviously, if they have a judgment token, you spend a CP for full hit rerolls. And if you roll a 6 to hit, you do D3 plus 3 mortals and the sequence ends. And this weapon's like also like AP4 D3 plus 3. So it's a Dark Lance in melee where 6s to hit just like Dark Lance smite people, which is super sick. And since this guy has Warrior Lord, he would ignore wound caps. So you just walk up to Abaddon, hope you roll 2 6s, and like send him in next week. Or you like, you know, soften him up a little bit with shooting and then run this guy in there. The other thing that's cool about this guy is he can do impact hits on the charge. He does have to roll above your toughness or roll a 6. But if he gets that 1 and 6 into like a tough wound cap thing, he'll do a smite, which is really nice. The other combo with the Einhir champion that you can take, that someone else has pointed out here. Yes, the champ with the Dark Star Axe. So the Dark Star Axe is a war gear upgrade. It is the other weapon that the Einhir champ can take instead of the funny hammer. So the Dark Star Axe gives him 2 attacks per 1. So it's 8 attacks at like 5-3-1. But if you take the Ymir Warlord trait, Guild Connections, you improve the damage of his weapon by 1. So now it's 8 attacks at like 5-3-2. So the combo here is obviously like personal grudge something, reroll hits into it, fish for 4s, and just hope you roll enough like 4s to hit to auto wound. And then if you don't, you reroll wounds in melee as well, and you hopefully do enough damage to kill the wound cap thing. Obviously, you don't expect this guy to solve the wound cap problem on his own, but you soften up whatever you're trying to deal with, and then send this melee guy in, and it should finish them off. And, oh, yeah. Nick is asking, what is putting up banners on Beam Death? Yes. So your Call and your Forge Master are your only 2 infantry units that start on the board. Luckily, you're only putting up 2 banners at the start of the game. So the Call, I find, can on certain missions, if you can reach one with a 5-inch move, the Call will put that one up. The nice thing about the Forge Master is the Forge Master can advance an action. That's just like on his data sheet as long as he's got the little apron buddy with him. So if there is a objective within 8 inches of your DZ, the Forge Master goes and does that one. So I'm thinking like Pryos and what is it? secure missing artifacts. Hopefully you got to pull your objective towards you. Then you'll be able to put up banners on those 2 turn 1. Obviously, Scouring, you can put up turn 1. Recover the relics, you can put up turn 1. Banners is pretty sketchy on Data Scry. It's like a safe 5, and as you take over the middle, you can kind of get them. Usually the Forge Master's putting it up on Data Scry. Also consider prospects on that mission. And trying to think of other missions here. Tide, you can obviously put up both. So, yeah, if you're really worried, like if you're matchup dependent, you could also start a squad of Thunderkin on the board, and they could banners turn 1. I'm still new to using them, so I like to strat reserve both of them. Yeah. Animox points out here, teleporting call turn 1 for banner. I have done that before. I did that in a game, Death and Zeal, or it was Conversion against Guard at Slaanesh. I definitely was like, I need to like also score passively while pressuring him in order to win this game, and pressure is primary. So turn 1, I sent the call up into the sky, and he came down and bannered that top objective in Conversion, which is usually impossible for you to get to. So if your opponent's not going to like rush those top objectives, you can burn your call's teleport to go banner up there. But you're going to probably want to go send a unit of bikes up there to protect him, because losing the call early is a bummer.
Doesn't it? Did we decide that it also works to just start the Tech Marine in a train?
It sucks if you go second into a shooting army, though.
Yes, just don't do that.
Yeah. If you're playing against like a, what is it? An army. If you're playing against an opponent that's gonna like not shoot you to death, you could start the Tech Marine in a train, and now you have an 11-inch banner. You also could start the call in a train if you don't think you're going to be able to glare at something turn 1, and now you have like an 8-inch move banner. So, yeah. But that's like the other sketchy thing is with banners in this is once like your infantry starts dying, or like infantry has to like get engaged, it's hard to put up banners. The best thing about it though is kind of like mid to late game when you've cleared out their side of the board. You have like 2 Zerkers running around, and they go like walk over to your opponent's midfield objective and plant a banner. That's something that can happen as well. So, yeah, I guess we're moving on real quick here. So, how do we play against Votann? And this is where you guys can also like definitely hop in. So, playing against Votann, we've talked a lot about how they'll kill pretty much everything they can see. But in exchange, they can get their primary pressured, and they aren't going to be scoring passively against you. So their game plan is pretty projected. They're going to be running at you. They're going to be trying to delete you. If you don't score passively, get ready for a rough game, because you're going to have to be running at them, which you don't like to do. But what can you do to stop them from just deleting things that they see? Well, reducing their damage output. The biggest thing is if they have forts, tagging forts with trash units. If you have a fast unit that like a land speeder is perfect for this. Goes 21 inches, shoots, charges. They're not going to overwatch you probably unless they're GTL with Uthar, who can guarantee that like 6 to hit. It's not usually worth the CP. You're just going to tag it, and now they have to scratch their head and go, how many guns do I devote to killing you in melee, and how many do I declare out? And if they guess wrong, they're stuck in melee with you for another turn. So they have to overcommit, and they might even have to spend CP depending on how tanky the unit you tag them with is. I have annoyingly had a rat land speeder tag me, and I'm like, all right, 8 bolts in the autocannon should be enough. I'm declaring the big beam out. And then it tanked all its saves, and it lived on 2. And I'm like, nice. Very cool land speeder. Another thing, too, is a lot of Votann players will screen. If they have troops, they'll screen with troops. If they have bikes, they'll screen with bikes. You can do things where you can like charge their screen, get a big enough charge, go around their screen, and then just like consolidate into the land fort. If you're able to get a kill on their screen, flip an objective for them, and tag the land fort with a single unit, like that's some stonks right there. It's pretty good. Another thing too, when talking about the forts, is if you have the movement to wrap the forts on the charge, do so. If you can wrap the forts so they can't countercharge you with the Zerkers, that's great. Usually what I'm doing with the forts is I know that you're going to come up and tag it. I know that my fort's going to have to shoot like some stupid Stormboys unit next turn. But I'm content in the fact that 10 Zerkers are going to come out and delete like 500 points of things they can see. If the Zerkers are trapped in the tank, the Votann players not doing great because they have to shoot out the things wrapping them, and then you can probably just wrap the tank again next turn. So if you're playing Votann, don't have your forts right next to each other. If they get to tag and wrap both forts with one unit, that's terrible. Also, if they get to tag both forts with one unit, that's terrible. So do you guys want to like talk about this a little bit more? Any more
sure.
tips and
I think
tricks
that
on tagging forts? Or
there's a lot of
reducing damage
nuance to
output?
that. So the first thing worth mentioning with the wrapping is it sounds like a really big prospect because you're like, usually when you think about wrapping a transport, you're thinking about trying to wrap and trap so that when it dies, no one gets out, which is great, but we're not even trying to do that here. And the reason that matters is because when you try to wrap and trap, any single model that can fit through a little gap gets out, and maybe you kill 2 or 3 of them if you line it up just right. But when disembarking from a transport, normally you have to get all 5 dudes out. And if you can't fit all 5 dudes within 3 of the boat, and there's no way to make it 6 because it's not dead, within 3 of the boat and outside of 1 of your unit, they're not getting out at all. They just can't. So it's way easier than you think it is. Get some practice doing this into your buddy or on TTS or whatnot to know what units can do it reliably. If you're playing GSC, it's every unit in your army. So that's a big thing. The second big thing is that Nick is talking about how the goal of the tag is to mitigate the output in terms of split fire. Ideally, it mitigates it way harder than that, because what you're actually stopping when you do a tag like that is not so much you're forcing guns in different places. What you're doing is you're forcing him to not move, because Votann fallback and shoot is core locked. So if the fort is tagged, it's not going anywhere if it wants to shoot. And this tag should also be a move block in some way. So he's not, he can't move forward at all. And that means that you can hide preemptively, right? The forts they're medium speed, they move 10. But once they're in midfield, 10 inches is plenty to cut angles. But if he can't move, he can't cut angles. So if you tag him, know he's going to be tagged, you can hide from his current position, and now you're just good to go. You're completely invulnerable to getting shot by that land fort. The best case scenario is you get in, you wrap the thing, the dudes can't get out, and there's no other target, so all he can do is throw everything into the 12 guardsmen or whatever that you've wrapped him up with and move on well from there. Though also, even if he's pretty deep, the wrap isn't nearly as important as the tag, because if the Zerks are getting out in his own deployment zone, you're pretty happy with that state of affairs. Anything you want to put on to this tactic, Lucas?
If you want to overwhelm the Votann player, it's also very important that you tag with the appropriate unit so that you don't just get blown out of combat you pass the Votann player's turn, they kill you with like 2/3 of the fort weapons, and then the big beam goes elsewhere and like beams through 3 of your units. That's kind of worst case scenario. So because all of the fort weapons are 2 and 4 damage, one thing I've noticed is you want to try to tag the fort with 1 and 3 wound models, so that it's very difficult for them to efficiently kill your entire unit with, just let's say they got like little beam, minigun, big beam up top. If you tag with a bunch of 1 wound models, 10 1 wound models, they're probably not going to have enough damage to kill the entire unit with all the 2 damage shots and then still put the big beam out of combat. Or if they do, it's somewhat risky. So
and it's probably bleeding CP as well. It means that the strats they really want to put into your value units have to go into them instead.
Exactly. Yeah. So just trying to prevent them from still getting value out of their. If you're trying to overwhelm them, you're probably going to get beamed. So trying to prevent that beaming by tagging with the appropriate unit can be really big. Also, when you're going for the wrap on the fort, keep in mind things like fly units can do that very effectively, because they can just, Votann have like next to no models, so they can just position your guys wherever the hell you want to, basically, or abilities to pile in extra distance to really fully wrap the fort and make sure that guys can't out. Those can all be very effective.
Definitely. We should also mention the character tag situation, because if you're out there thinking, oh, all my trash units are too trash, they're going to die to a single beam, have we got a show for you. Nick, you want to break down how the character tag works?
Yeah, I think Lucas talked a little bit of this on the Orcs episode last week, but he has used it to great effect against me. So when a vehicle is elected to shoot into combat, you can only shoot things you're in engagement range of, and then you can declare shots outside of combat. And the idea is if you once you've resolved all the shots into the guys in combat, if you are no longer in engagement range, you may now resolve the shots out of combat. So the trick is you have a unit that can look out to a character, be it a vehicle, be it a monster, be it a squad of 3 or more models. You have it base the land fort after it has tagged it, so the land fort cannot pile on a console. Then you have a character that is within engagement range of the land fort, but is not basing it. It could be 0.2 away, but it is not closer than the guys basing it, because the unit basing it is touching it 0 inches away. That means the Votann player cannot declare the shots from the land fort into the character, because the character is still lookout sir. They're within 3 of a unit that can lookout sir. They're not the closest viable target or whatever, or they're not the closest, viable target or visible target or something, whatever. You can't shoot them. So when the Votann player goes, I'm going to declare all my little shots here, my big shot out, you can still declare that, but then when you kill all the little guys and you check to see for engagement range, you're still in engagement range of the character that you never could have killed because you never could have targeted them.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a real big thing. Lucas does this with Zagstruck all the time. I'll do this with the Keller War from time to time because he has automatic charges. It's a really important thing to have in your bag into Votann, and it's especially well comboed with the wrap, because if you don't get the wrap, well, then the Zerks are getting out and they're punching this character to death. But if you do get the wrap and no one's getting out and no one's charging your character in combat, cool. They're still in combat next turn. And you can literally rinse and repeat the process. Mm-hmm.
The nice thing about this is it turns a character plus any unit of 3 or more models into a stop land fort from shooting for a whole turn.
Mm-hmm.
And also,
obviously,
go ahead.
Obviously, if you have 3 6-up armor guys, maybe throw a 4th guy in there because the land fort might kill a model. But
this is true. Be careful.
I found this especially effective when your character can fight on death, because then the only way to solve that character is you get berserkers out, you shoot the unit away, the berserkers charge the character fights on death. So you've tied up the fort for a full turn and you've taken a squad of berserkers as attacks with you. So I think Zagstruck doing this with Storm Boys is great. Trajan doing this with I don't know, most people aren't running Benatari, but some depleted squad that's at least 3 strong tagging a fort, great. 5 Wolfguard and your Chapter Master with Thunderhammer as a Space Wolf, great.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those are great options.
Let's be real. If 5 Wolfguard and a Chapter Master are making it into a land fort, that fort is dead.
I mean pile in to engage it after you've killed their screen.
Also, the Wolfguard aren't that good into it. They rely on Lightning Claws, dude, with wound rolls.
I was thinking about the 5 combi meltas, but yeah.
We were rolling it last night. It is wildly swingy, my dude.
For sure.
A lot more than you'd think.
The Thunderhammer is not, though.
The Thunderhammer is not.
The thing. Anyway, but yes, that's a big thing. Something we didn't talk about earlier that I think bears mentioning, one of the strengths actually of Votann is that in addition to it, sort of in contrast, I suppose, in parallel with their inability to generate passive secondaries, they also don't give up anything at all, and it's not close.
That's true.
So if you yourself walk into a game with the intention of, I need to pick a 3rd secondary off of a kill, the secondary advantage into Votann isn't quite what it is if you're playing, Orcs, GSC, Sisters, AdMech, Guard, and anyone else with Marines, anything else with nonsense secondaries.
Yeah, the best kill secondary of them is no prisoners, and most lists are going to give you a 9 on it. What? Not great. Bring it down is going to be a 6 to an 8, depending on how many Sagittars versus forts they have, and Assassinate's going to be a 7 to a 10. So yeah, that's true. Another thing about kind of reducing their damage output in general, the bikes are another thing that also kind of going into attacking their primary. Killing their bikes as soon as possible is really good because now they can't flip objectives from you. That's all their obsec. Obviously, if they have Hearthkin, kill those guys too. But the thing is, the bikes are a lot easier to kill. It's just 10 wounds, 4-up armor, obviously void armor, but they're never getting better than a 4-up save. And they're T5, which is fine. They're not going to die to small arms fire, but you can definitely throw an autocannon knight at them and delete them off the board, or like 3 pigs or 2 war towers and roll like a Greek god. But yeah.
Yeah, the bikes are simultaneously the fastest thing, the only obsec thing, one of the shootiest things, certainly in terms of volume. Like it is so definitely target number 1. Basically,
Killing
no
the
matter
bikes
what
is
you're
good
playing.
because it attacks their primary and it reduces their damage output, right?
Yeah.
It's
also worth mentioning.
Sorry, yeah, ignoring all forms of cover, as Lucas said, and they have the 1 CP give a thing a judgment token. So yeah, delete the bikes.
It's also worth mentioning in the realm of tagging things. If your opponent decides to screen the forts, put the forts out front and put the bikes in the back, the bikes they can fall back and shoot for a CP, but it's 1 core unit. So if you tag all the bikes, all the Thunderkin, even if you don't wrap any of them, one of those like 5 squads is shooting at most, and that's just not a big deal, generally speaking.
Yep. And then obviously, if you can find any way to get obsec on their home objective, if you can like ever flip it, if you can ever be like, I'm going to give you a 4, I'm going to give you a 0. Obviously, that's just like good generic advice in 40K. But look at their objectives and be like, what do you actually have back there, dude? Because chances are it's going to be like a Forge Master. So, yeah, flipping it, not that hard into them.
And Votann play on such thin margins that the value of that is higher than it is into almost any other army in the game.
Yeah. And then reducing their secondary scoring. If you are building your list and you're like, oh man, I'm shaking in my boots at the thought of playing Votann, look at what kill secondaries you give up. Because chances are they're going to probably be taking 2 into you. If you give up Bring It Down, chances are you're playing Knights, and I'm sorry, because you can't change that. If you, I don't know, like have like a lot of vehicles and you're like, I can cut 2 from the list to give them like an 8 instead of a 10. Might be worth it. If you have a lot of characters that are going to be running forward, just think about how you're going to play the game maybe a little bit differently. Like, okay, maybe I don't send this like really squishy character in if I don't need to.
This is one of the only matchups where I think it's absolutely the right call to put in resources to dodge assassinate. If you play something like GSC, where you have a lot of characters that would be really helpful to have up in the foreground, but with their primary game already being worse than yours, just win the race to 100 and don't let them back in by killing characters.
You don't want a squad of Zerkers charging 3 characters and killing all 3. That's bad.
It's very bad.
Yeah.
Don't randomly position your Reductus in charge range for no reason. It doesn't go well.
Yeah. Obviously, like if you're playing singles, you can trade your character. Like if you gotta like trade the value of a character death. Like, okay, I'm gonna give them 3 points on assassinate, but how many points is this character gonna get me in return? Totally worth it. If you're playing teams, you can definitely like troll the Votann player if they pick assassinate and run away. So just kind of like think about like format wise, it's going to be a little bit different. But like overall, you can control what you give up, and the Votann player can't really change what secondaries they have to pick into you. So yeah. Talking about some of their biggest counters here, we talked about them already a lot in this episode. Talking about pressure armies, so like orcs, world eaters, even like the new Slanesh Demons Rush list to some extent, GSC to some extent with the bikes can be putting pressure on you. Very different than orcs and world eaters and demons. They're not like running up to you and threatening to kill the forts, but they're threatening to gum up the tires of the forts like the entire game while also flipping objectives. But yeah, let's talk about like orcs, world eaters, demons. Like, why are those matchups so hard? Lucas, you want to talk about maybe why like the orc matchup into Votann, like why you think it's so favorable, like what you're looking for, that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think fundamentally it does come down to my secondaries are better than yours, and they enable me to play more passively. And anytime you can be an orc player and force the opponent to come to you, that's cash money because you get to line up the charges you want to. And orcs do absolutely have the capacity to kill a fort. I usually try to do it on the second turn of actually engaging the Votann, where on turn 1 you try to remove everything as much as possible that's not a fort, and then tie up the forts. And then they get out their Zerkers, they do a ton of counterattack damage, and then in the following turn the bosses follow up and kill the forts. And then by that point, basically in 2 turns, everything on both sides has died. But you've denied their primary. They've gotten some secondary points from killing you, but you've got all your secondaries as well, so you can just basically win on the primary. That's more or less how it goes. I also find that Votann have troubles dealing with invulns because their AP is so good. that if you can just spam enough like 5-up invuln bodies at them all in one turn, they can't kill all of it, which is weird because usually Votann is like one of the highest damage armies in the game. But you can definitely hedge on that invuln quite comfortably as orcs on the go turn, which is really powerful.
Yep. And similar to that, demons, right? Demons AP, your AP is worthless into them. Obviously, like the Slanesh Horde, if they're not careful with their positioning, your bikes can just blow up a bunch of demonettes. But Lucas and I were talking about this last night, and he was like, don't you just like send your bikes in like in wave 2 and like kill the demonettes? And I'm like, that's true, but like all they have to do is like basically fling a squad forward every turn and try to deny an objective, and they're meanwhile scoring like banners, warp ritual, reality rebels. So like they're scoring pretty well. To bring back some data from StatCheck, we're also looking up the Votann win rate into demons right now. Unfortunately, there's like only like 65 games played in Arks, so like that's not super statistically significant, but it's a 25% win rate right now. So it gives you a little bit of indication of how rough that matchup can be on paper.
I think it's the orc matchup is rougher for Votann than demons, because demons also give up the kill secondaries. I think the difference is that demons have an actual tough time killing the land fortresses, whereas orcs do not. Demons can kill everything else just fine in the Votann army. With all their demonette scratches, and more importantly, all the fiends with their strength 5, moderate AP, moderate damage. Pretty good into Zerkers, pretty good into Thunderkin, pretty good into Bikers. But you're never going to kill a fort, so it's just mitigating the forts as much as possible. I think the demonette pile-in extra stratagem is going to be money in this matchup, because you can actually prevent the Berserkers from getting out, and then that basically locks out the game on the go turn where you just send in everything to tag a fort. You just prevent the Berserkers to get out. Easy peasy.
Demon Deep Strike is great in a Votann because they're like mostly leadership 8 and 9 across the board. So you're deep striking like 7 inches away from them usually, 6 or 7. So yeah. Other things that are good, the Zinch list, the mono Zinch lists that we've been seeing are obviously a very good effective counter to shooting. Votann does get to run at them with Zerkers, which is cool, but it's kind of like a question of how quickly can your Zerkers kill my pinks. Meanwhile, I'm hitting you with Flamers that are deleting bikes and Mortals that are deleting everything.
But also like the Zerks into pinks is sketchy as hell.
Yeah,
because that's 15 attacks. You need to do minimum 12 wounds to kill them on average, and it's not that hard to roll 1 more 6 than average. That's just not happening. That is terrifying.
It's sketchy.
Jeez.
Yep. And it's like, because you kind of have to soften them up with shooting, but if you soften them up with shooting and they split all those things, it's like all of a sudden there's more bodies there to deal with now. It's just like, yikes.
It seems like a fort with all the mortal buffs is the reliable way to do it. Because if you can like cause them to fail 4 to 5 saves and then take 5 mortals, that'll kill a squad of dudes.
Yes,
for sure.
But it's like if you're spending 2 CP to kill 1 squad of pinks every turn, and like how many squads are they running in those?
I'm not saying it's a good value proposition.
It's not great.
No,
so I was saying here, you should sweep with the Zerks to that kind of unit. I agree. Unfortunately, I'm running all hammers. I've not found a great effective. So that's the issue. Is you can run axes on the Zerkers, which does give them sweep attacks, which would be amazing into like things like pinks. If your meta was like usually like demons, elves, sisters, orcs, it's a 50-50 because the sweeps are really good at killing the infantry, but they're really bad at killing the bosses and the kill rigs.
I think it genuinely might be time to reevaluate having 3 squads with mauls, though. I think there might actually be some value in having 1 or 2 squads with the axes, as much as we memed those to death on initial release. And I agree that during the Nephilim meta, it was just way better to have the mauls. But I think now there's enough horde in the game that you might actually see some value in getting the axes.
Yeah.
And I mean, the part of the reason the mauls were so good was into AOC that AP3 was money. No longer necessary, right? You can kill a marine just as. I mean, I guess the axes are AP3.
To be clear, the axes are AP3 on both profiles as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
The reason why it was 7-3-2 as opposed to 10-3-3.
You can still kill marines with them now as you could in Nephilim, is my point.
Yeah. Yep. So it might be time to be 1 or 2 axe squads.
Can we talk about the Mole launcher? You mentioned that was in a different list and it wasn't in yours. What's the reasoning on why you should or shouldn't take it these days?
So the Mole launcher is this upgrade you can buy for 10 points for a Zerker squad. It's a D6 blast 5.2 gun with 24-inch range. Ignore line of sight. All right, it's no Castellan launcher or whatever. It's not great, but what it does give you access to is a very cool stratagem for 2 CP, which is if you score a hit. And let me see. There's like a restriction on certain units it can't hit. Subterranean explosives. Okay, if you score a hit against a unit, if it is not Titanic and cannot fly, until the start of your next shooting phase, you have the move characteristic of models in the unit, and it is thought lasted. So it gives you access to fight lasting, which is really cool if you're trying to charge in 2 places at once. It also gives you access to point at something like Dark Angel's Terminators and be like, nice, go, 2.5 inches. Very good into slow moving melee units or like slow moving. I mean, it's half, right? What's a kill rig's movement? 12. Yeah, so you could be like, kill rig, go 6. That could be pretty good if you're like shooting something in front of their army that's move blocking their army. Yeah, you can beat up knights a bit more. That sounds funny. Like, move block, shoot a chaos knight in the front of their army. But yeah, it is 2 CP, so you're not doing this every turn. You're kind of doing it at like opportune moments, and you also have to get the Zerkers out of the wagon to do it. So you're probably doing it at the turn that they're like charging something. Or they're getting up behind a wall and praying your opponent doesn't have an ignore line of sight. But yeah, the other thing that it does, the downside with it though, you're like, this all sounds like upside. It's great because it also gives you +1 wound and attack. Why would you not pay 10 points for this? You get a giant like a 40 millimeter base to put this on.
I think it's a 50.
Yeah, I think it's even bigger. Like you go from a 28 to a 50. So you just have this gigantic circle in your squad now. And the role of the Zerkers is usually to like get into like these tight gaps in buildings or like go around screens and like slam things. So all of a sudden you're not doing that. Like you're not moving between units as effectively. You're not getting into buildings as effectively because you have this giant fat base in the back.
Confirmed it's a 50. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's some merit to if you have just like, I don't know, 10 or 20 points sitting around at the end of your list, maybe putting it on 1 squad or 2 squads. I think in like some people really like it, especially in like teams play. I know because it gives you like a lot of like weird slowing down the game plays. So yeah, I've seen it in some lists where people are running Einhir champs as well. So you'll like fight last something, champ runs in, Zerks run in, punch both. Because like even though Zerkers fight on death, like getting interrupted with them hurts because you can't use any unit-based stratagems when you're fighting on death because the unit's never activating. So if someone interrupts and they wipe out your whole Zerker unit, you don't get to 1 CP reroll hits, which means maybe your Zerker unit goes from killing them to doing like 2 damage or 3 damage, So I can definitely see the value of the fight last.
It definitely lets you dictate plays, which has value.
It does let you dictate plays. Yeah. Other counters to orcs, or not orcs, to Votann. We talked about orcs and demons, how they pressure your primary. World Eaters is very similar. World Eaters is a little bit sketchier for them. They have to play it a lot more carefully than orcs because orcs have like the nice meaty transports and orcs also have that wall turn where they get to lunge at you. World Eaters have the issue where they're just like power armor, 2 wounds, and Votann love that. You just get to delete them if you see them. But if they play this nice, careful game into you, they can just like effectively send out a few units a turn and slow you down and score passively. Or they can go first on the close mission and just overwhelm you by moving 18 inches with 2 units turn 1. And they'll uppercut a fort too if they make contact with the Exalted 8-bound. So yeah, that matchup can be sketchy because by default you need to come to them, which is not great because they want you to do that. Yeah, we kind of talked about that as well. GSC, similar pressure. They're not killing you, but they're great at like controlling the board. They're great at tagging forts. They're great at flipping primary. They're great at killing bikes behind walls because they just show up wherever they want. Other armies, guard are an issue. They can outshoot you, which is not what you want when you are a shooting army. And they also outscore you on their secondaries. They have inflexible command, which just scores 15 in the first 3 turns for existing on the board. And yeah, it's not a great one. And then kind of thinking about like we're talking about Space Wolves. Space Wolves are a horde of like 50 rats with combi meltas, which is not what you want to see. And even if they don't kill your fort, then they can just do the thing where like, hey, I'll tag it this turn. Sounds good, man. And then elves to some extent are actually tough. We were talking about earlier Phoenix Lords. If you go up against a list with like 2 Phoenix Lords, you might be like scratching your head like, oh, this is kind of sketchy. Elves have good mortals, which is really good into Votann. They don't have a lot of wounds. They're relying on their invuln and, wound reroll ability to stop that. And also the high toughness of the forts. And also elves have a lot of fast trash units that are great at getting behind and just tagging a fort. So yeah, they're basically just going to keep move blocking your forts over and over and over and scoring like Warp Ritual banners behind. So yeah, someone here finding Sisters difficult depending on terrain. Sisters stats wise says it's like a 49% for the Votann, or like a 50% depending on the week. So it's like right down the middle. I think that a lot of that is AOC going away with Sisters made them a lot weaker to Votann. One of the strengths in the Sisters was if you could go first and pregame move your bikes, you could just delete them from behind walls. And now you do that even harder because they don't get AOC. So Sisters have to watch out for that. If you can kill their Rets before the Rets get to fire on the forts, then you can just kind of move towards them uncontested. If you can delete the Repentia, same thing. The Repentia actually aren't that good because they don't get the wound rerolls. What's really scary in Sisters is like Celestine and Vol like sitting like in their home base / on the shrine. You have a really hard time dealing with both of those units, and they can definitely kill like Zerkers. Like your goal is you're like running Zerkers in, but I don't even know if 5 Zerkers kills Vol on average. And it definitely kills Celestine, but then Celestine stands back up, and now you got to send another like squad in.
Yeah, I think because they score so much better than you passively, I think if you would just blitz the Sisters immediately, especially if you go first and get to kill a bunch of stuff on the way in with the bikers, like getting the 3 squads of bikers to shoot the Sisters army seems like potentially a lost condition for the Sisters.
Agreed.
Right? Because how far the bikers move 24?
Yes, and then they shoot.
So yeah, if you're literally starting, because the Sisters have no way. If you're going first, you do your pregame move first. They have no way to block out your pregame move, right?
They'll get to block out one of them, right? Because you go first, you pregame a squad of bikes on one flank. They pregame a Rhino on the other flank.
Yep.
So, but if you pile all your bikes on one side and say that's the lane I'm taking, again, because you have so few drops, you're fully explaining the strategy before any other deployment happens. But it's possible.
Yeah, the Sisters player should definitely wait to drop one of their Rhinos until they know where your bikes are going.
Well, put down all 3 bikes, one on the left, one in the middle, one on the right. See where the Rhino goes. You're going first. You get the first move. Move the unit that corresponds with the Rhino. Correct?
If they only have one Rhino, yeah.
Gotcha.
Another thing too that Inamox is pointing out is that they could strat reserve the Rets, which is definitely spooky. I think I'd still try to pressure them. I think what you're trying to do in that situation then is cut off their X to the shrine. If you can pin them into their DZ and basically be like, I'm going to try to deny you 6 points on shrine, like that could be really good. Also, if you're trying to pressure them early and forcing them to use their nice miracle dice on killing you rather than on leap of faith, might be enough as well. So yeah, I think it's definitely, as pointed out here, finding Sisters difficult depending on the terrain. I think it is very terrain dependent. The lighter the board, the better for Votann, but especially for that matchup. If you're able to pregame move and cut angles with the bikes, it is quite good. I also think Sisters are just a lot harder of an army to play than Votann. And some of that might be like it's the game is on the Sisters player, and if the Sisters player messes up, they just get ran over. So yeah. Obviously there's some other matchups that are difficult. These are, in my opinion, like these kind of archetypes right here are like what the most difficult ones are here. So yeah. Where does that put Votann into the meta? / looking ahead. So I think they've kind of solidified at this point. We've been playing Arks for 2 months. I mean, some people have been playing it for 3, but we didn't start till after LVO. They've pretty much solidified as a strong, I'd say, gatekeeper shooting army. There are some armies that you'll definitely play against Votann with an army and be like, oh my god, these guys are impossible to beat. Or you'll play against Votann with an army and be like, wow, these guys really don't score any points. So depending on which side you're on, you're getting gate kept or you are just running them over. They are definitely good into slower armies. So armies that can't come over to their side of the board, armies that can't tag them as effectively, armies that can't move block them as effectively. And they're really good in armies that take up a lot of space. So like Knights, Imperial Knights. Trying to think of other armies that can't really hide it's really just those. If someone's like spamming like a vehicle skew list, like a vehicle skew guard could definitely go second into Votann and just like get blown up. So yeah, if you can't hide from them, they will kill. So yep. They have difficult games into the top dogs of the meta. They're either getting outshot, which is really just guard. The Tau one is kind of a wash, or they're getting outscored. And they have very polarized matchups. It's a lot of just like, I'm going to score 30 or I'm going to solve the game and like run you back. Like as Lucas was saying in the Orcs game, we both like collided into each other and there's massive carnage on both sides. But then like, it comes out like 100 to like 40 or something like that, like because just like how the game went well. So like trading points for pieces for points. And then they have limited options in list variety right now. We talked about 3 different lists today. I know I've seen a few more, like there's the 18 bikes, 15 Terminators lists that I like seen in the UK. So there's some variety.
There's 30 Terminators.
Sure. Yeah, teleport them all in one turn. Can't do that. But yeah, so there's some cute stuff with the Terminators. I know someone who, Danny from Team Poland, I think, has been talking about he really values like a squad of 8 in like every list of his, just because they solve a lot of the Votann problems, which is like your opponent has to like dedicate resources to screening them every turn. At the end of the game, they could lay claim somewhere, like they could just teleport somewhere onto a lay claim. They're another like infantry body that can do actions early. They also shoot like crazy. Like that unit has so many shots. And in Ymir, they're relatively tanky because they're 2 up, 4 up. So like Lucas was saying, where Votann have an issue with dealing with 1 wound bodies because you have just like 16 damage 2 shots. These guys have like 60 damage 1 shots or whatever. They will delete like 2 squads of Neos a turn, I think is what we were like thinking maybe they could do. And it was like, that's pretty scary. So yeah, if the Terminators go down in points in the balance slate, you best believe I'm going to be trying some of them out. And I might even be trying some of them out anyways. Obviously there's also different sub factions, but we really are only seeing like 2, and that's with an asterisk. It's mostly like everyone's playing Ymir and there's a little bit of GTL. There's not a lot of like creativity or variety because those 2 are just so much stronger than everyone else. And then the high points cost makes list construction difficult. Like when I was talking with Lucas, it's like, maybe I cut a Zerker squad for a squad of troops, but then it's like, you have 35 points. What do you buy with 35 points? Like, I guess it's like 30 points because you're buying the med pack. So it's like, that's a Thunderkin. That's like cut 5 points somewhere for a bike. So you just kind of have like weird squad sizes as you start moving things around. It gets a little wacky. So yeah. I think as of today, their current win rate in the Arks of Omen meta is 49%, according to the StatCheck metadata dashboard. But like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, it was like 54%. So they're kind of fluctuating between that like high 40s to mid 50s. I'd say it's like solid to put them somewhere in like the 52% region. So healthy by GW standards. Unfortunately, I don't think the army is that healthy because, again, talking about it as a gatekeeper army, you either have the damage or the scoring ability to just beat them, or you don't. And they still have this issue where, because Judgment's such a cracked mechanic, and they have very easy access to Chapter Master rerolls and high AP and ignore multiple forms of cover, they're just going to be deleting things that they see. So you kind of have to, you don't really get to play against them in a traditional way, if that makes sense. You kind of have to think of like weird ways to slow down their damage output. Or your secondaries just like solve the problem for you and you just like run at them. But yeah, they're not the easiest thing to just run over, if that makes sense, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I don't think we're going to see many changes to them with 10th edition around the corner. I know people have been like, they need to rework all this stuff. I think it's getting reworked in 10th edition. Like, I don't see why they would put the effort into reworking Judgment in like the balance slate when, you know, we're getting full codex rewrites in what, 4 months, like with the indexes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I could see if anything, I think it'd be interesting to encourage list diversity by maybe nerfing Ymir and reducing the points cost on the troops and the Hearthguard.
Please.
I think the land forts. Yeah, I think the land forts are totally fine where they are. Points wise, them going up was fine. They're ludicrously hard to kill, and they kill a ludicrous amount of stuff. The bikes are pretty fine. They're very fair for 35 points. Fast, not too hard to kill. The Thunderkin are great. I'm glad the Thunderkin are viable. So yeah, I think it'd be cool to like see a little more viability with like troops and Hearthguard. That'd be a fun way to close out 9th edition. But 10th edition's coming right around the corner, and they get to revisit the book, so that's sick.
Very cool. You got one more question in the chat before we wrap things up here.
Yeah. How do you think they're going to do into the Desolation Marine meta? A little bit better than some other people, because the Desolation Marines are AP2 in Dev Doctrine, and since they're shooting from Ignore Line of Sight, I get +1 on my save, and I also ignore the first pip of AP. So it's actually just, I'm just back to my armor saves. Unfortunately, as I was saying, the bikes are a 4-up armor save, and because I guess I'd ignore that pip of AP. So I'd guess
the bikes would be on a 4-up.
No, yeah, they go back to a 4-up. I think the issue with that, the Desolation Marines are. I'm worried about that Castellan launcher, dude. That thing's AP3, 3 damage with the Mastercrafted one.
I'm like 90% sure it's AP1 goes to 2 in Dev Doctrine.
Gotcha, but it's still like D6 shots, hitting on 3s, rerolling, wounding on 3s. You got to make 4-up saves. Every failed one's a dead bike. I guess the 4-wound guy. Sure. Yeah, I think the issue with the Desolation Marines is like over the course of the game, they are definitely going to just be killing the bikes. So since you can't
have the bikes in range of them, once you know where the Desolation Marines are going, just measure 36 inches. Like that is a sufficient distance in this game to be able to hide from them. And so you kind of got to like skirt around them until you've, I think, whittled down whatever their front line is enough. I
think you have to skirt around them, and then when you commit, you like commit to hitting them really hard, or you commit to killing the Desolation Marines.
Because the Desos are really bad at killing basically everything else in your army, because it's just strength for 1 damage.
If troops came back,
I mean, remember they also have a Dark Lance.
That's fair.
Yeah. When I
this is some of the best anti-fort Marines have access to right now.
It is. It is.
D3 plus 3 is just such a drug.
It's definitely measure their threat ranges, be just outside the threat ranges, and then probably pounce on them. But the problem is it's stapled to like 25 transhuman Terminators, so that's a toughie.
I think Dark Angels are, weirdly enough, a pretty decent matchup for Votann, unless I've fundamentally misunderstood.
We were looking it up. It's like a 49 or something. It's like kind of right down the middle. Judgment's really good into them.
Judgment is insane. Ignore cover everywhere. Massive 2 and 4 damage output, which is ideal into Terminators with 6 that feel no pain. Seems not terrible.
Yeah. But I'm hoping that they just get nerfed in the balance status slate. We won't have to worry
we'll see how that goes with the Desolation Marines, because the way that the Dark Angels builds exist right now, where their only anti-tank is a couple of speeders with meltas or punch, like the Votann are invulnerable until they get into combat. But suddenly that's not going to be the case so much. So we'll see how it shakes out. Anyway, we've been rambling on about dwarfs for about 2 hours now. Anything else you guys want to add before we sign off?
I've said all I wanted to say.
Very cool. Well, if you, dear listener, have some more things you want to say, you want to keep the conversation going, you can head over to patreon.com/bestintabletop, drop us a sub there, and join the Patreon exclusive Discord. Keep chatting. Nicholas Olsen Johnson, the best faction Votann player in both generalship and hobby, will be in there, as will myself, Lucas, and the rest of the cool people around. If you're checking us out on YouTube, or even if you're not, go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube. We really appreciate that. Drop us a like, comments, hit that silly little bell so you can see our ugly faces once a week at exactly 10 a.m. or 10:15 or 11. Who knows? If you like our silly little icons, check out our merch at bestintabletop.com/store. And once again, come to Brood Wars. It's going to be the best stuff. Team 40K is the best 40K. It's going to be the first weekend in June up in Olympia, Washington. Good hotel rates, good terrain. It's going to be a great time. Hope to see you all there. But with that all being said and done, thank you so much for listening. I've been Tyler.
I've been Nick.
No, I'm still Lucas.
And we'll see you next time for a double header next week. We've got episodes both Saturday and Sunday. They're both gonna be really good. You're not gonna want to miss them. But talk to you later, y'all.